Today, I want to take you into the heart of a place few dare to imagine. A place where time stands still, yet feels like a lifetime. We're talking about life inside Colombia's toughest prison. A space where killing time takes on a far deeper meaning than just boredom. Behind the towering walls and rusted bars lies a world stripped of freedom, but rich in human complexity. This isn't just about criminals paying for their crimes. It's about survival, adaptation, and sometimes even redemption. In these prisons, inmates face extreme overcrowding, poor sanitation, violence, and a constant threat of gang rule. For many, days are filled with fear. For others, there's creativity, making art, learning trades, or even creating businesses within the prison walls. But it's not all resilience. The system itself is broken. Underfunded, neglected, and often forgotten by the outside world, these institutions sometimes do more damage than good. Yet, even in the darkest corners, stories emerge of people fighting to reclaim their humanity, of guards trying to balance law and empathy, and of entire communities affected by what happens behind those gates. So why does this matter to us? Because the way a society treats its prisoners says everything about its values. If we want justice, not just punishment, then we must look at places like these and ask, are we helping people heal or just letting them rot? Overcrowding crisis expanded. One of the most critical and visible problems in Colombia's toughest prisons is the severe issue of overcrowding. Designed to hold a certain number of inmates, many of these facilities now house 2 to 3 times their intended capacity. For example, a prison built for 1,500 inmates may be holding over 4,000, creating an incredibly stressful and dangerous environment for both inmates and guards alike. This overcrowding has a ripple effect that touches every aspect of prison life. Basic necessities like beds, food, water, and access to bathrooms become luxury items rather than guaranteed rights. Inmates often sleep in shifts, taking turns to rest in overcrowded cells, while others are forced to sleep on the floor or in hallways. Personal space becomes non-existent, increasing tensions and contributing to frequent violent outbursts. Privacy, a fundamental human dignity, is completely stripped away. Beyond the physical discomfort, overcrowding stretches prison staff to their limits. With a guard-to-inmate ratio that can be as high as 1 to 150, enforcing order and providing security becomes nearly impossible. This power vacuum often leads to self-governance by prison gangs, who step in to control daily routines, resolve disputes, and run underground economies, further complicating the job of the authorities. Healthcare and psychological services are overwhelmed, if they exist at all. An inmate suffering from illness or injury may wait days or weeks for medical attention. The mental toll of being packed into tiny, hot, and unsanitary spaces with little to no access to fresh air or recreation leads to increased rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Colombia's justice system is also a contributor to this crisis. Many inmates are pretrial detainees who have not yet been convicted of a crime. Delays in the judicial process mean people can spend months or even years waiting for a court date, essentially serving time without a sentence. The lack of alternative sentencing, such as probation, house arrest, or community service, forces even nonviolent offenders into a system that is already collapsing under its own weight. This overcrowding isn't just a logistical issue. It's a humanitarian crisis that exposes the deep cracks in Colombia's legal and penal systems. It turns prisons from places of rehabilitation into breeding grounds for violence, disease, and hopelessness. Lack of resources expanded. In Colombia's toughest prisons, the lack of basic resources is one of the most defining and destructive characteristics of daily life. These facilities often operate under conditions of extreme scarcity, where essential supplies, such as food, water, medicine, and hygiene products, are either insufficient, poorly distributed, or entirely absent. This widespread deprivation isn't just a matter of discomfort. It undermines human dignity and can turn incarceration into a form of systemic abuse. Nutrition is one of the most urgent concerns. Meals are often limited to 2 a day, and the food itself is frequently of low nutritional value, poorly cooked, and insufficient in quantity. Inmates may go hungry or be forced to supplement their diets through contraband or by purchasing overpriced goods from internal black markets. Those without family support or money are left to rely on meager state rations that barely sustain life. In some cases, prisoners are reported to eat spoiled or infested food due to lack of oversight and resources. Water supply is another major issue. Many prisons lack consistent access to clean, running water, especially in rural or older facilities. Inmates may go days without being able to bathe or wash their clothes. Toilet facilities are often broken or shared by far too many people, leading to unhygienic conditions that can quickly result in the spread of disease. Without adequate sanitation, illnesses like skin infections, diarrhea, respiratory conditions, and even tuberculosis become common and sometimes deadly. The healthcare system inside the prison walls is just as fragile. Most prisons have only a minimal medical staff, often just one nurse or doctor for thousands of inmates. Medical supplies are limited, and advanced care is rarely available. When serious medical issues arise, inmates may face long waits for treatment or need to be transferred to outside hospitals, which is difficult due to a lack of transport, bureaucratic delays, or security concerns. Preventive care is almost non-existent, and mental health support is virtually absent, despite the obvious psychological strain that prison life imposes. In addition to physical resources, there's also a dire shortage of educational, vocational, and recreational programs. Without access to learning materials, skill-building courses, or even safe spaces to exercise or express themselves, many inmates are left in a state of mental stagnation. For those who want to rehabilitate or change their lives, the lack of opportunity becomes a major barrier. It also increases the likelihood of reoffending, since many leave prison with fewer skills and less hope than when they entered. The underfunding of the prison system also affects the staff, who are overworked, undertrained, and poorly paid. With limited training, guards may lack the knowledge or tools to handle conflict, de-escalate violence, or provide support to vulnerable inmates. Corruption can thrive in these environments, where officers are pressured to look the other way or supplement their income through bribes or illegal dealings. This scarcity isn't accidental. It's the result of decades of underinvestment, political neglect, and systemic inequality. Colombia's prison system is not only overwhelmed in numbers, but also deeply weakened by the chronic lack of essential resources needed to maintain basic human rights and a functioning institution. Violence and gang control expanded. Violence is not just a risk, but a constant reality inside Colombia's toughest prisons, where control over daily life often doesn't lie with the prison authorities, but with powerful inmate-run gangs. These criminal groups operate within the prison walls much like they do on the outside, exerting influence over everything from food distribution and cell assignments to smuggling operations, protection rackets, and even orchestrating external criminal activities from behind bars. In many of these prisons, the sheer number of inmates far outweighs the capacity and resources of prison staff, creating power vacuums that gangs are quick to fill. With little oversight and few consequences, these groups establish hierarchies and rules that must be followed by other inmates. Those who refuse or resist risk beatings, torture, or death. Newcomers, particularly young or vulnerable prisoners, are often the most at risk of being exploited or recruited by gang factions. Joining a gang may offer protection and access to basic necessities, but it comes at the cost of personal freedom, safety, and often morality. Territorial disputes between rival gangs can turn deadly. Fights break out over control of contraband routes, phone access, or even a spot in an overcrowded cell. Riots and mass brawls erupt, sometimes resulting in multiple deaths and injuries, and rarely is justice served within these closed systems. The violence is not always physical. Extortion is rampant, and threats against inmates' families outside the prison are used to maintain control and obedience. Weapons, though officially banned, are easily smuggled in, often with the help of corrupt staff or through creative means. Shanks, knives, and even firearms have made their way into prison populations, making every day a gamble for survival. Gangs often have the means to bribe guards or other officials, ensuring that their illicit activities continue unchecked. Drug trafficking inside the prisons is widespread, with entire networks functioning from within cells, supplying inmates, and using proceeds to fund operations on the outside. These gangs often become a parallel authority within the prison system, enforcing their own brand of justice. They run tribunals to punish those who steal, break unwritten rules, or resist their power, handing out beatings or worse. Inmates who have been targeted or threatened by gangs often have no one to turn to, as reporting to guards can lead to retaliation, and protective custody is limited or non-existent. The effect on the broader prison environment is toxic. The constant threat of violence erodes trust, isolates individuals, and fuels cycles of fear and retribution. Guards, too, live under threat, knowing that crossing the wrong inmate or gang can have deadly consequences. Some simply look the other way to protect themselves, while others actively participate in or profit from the gang-run systems. In many cases, prisons become recruitment centers for organized crime. Young offenders, instead of being rehabilitated, are pulled deeper into criminal networks, learning how to traffic drugs, commit fraud, or engage in violent acts more effectively. Rather than correcting behavior, the prison experience entrenches criminal identities and allegiances. The longer inmates remain exposed to this world, the harder it becomes for them to envision or access a life outside of violence and control. This toxic dynamic underscores a deep institutional failure, where the state has effectively lost control of its own penal system to the very criminals it seeks to contain. Mental and emotional strain expanded. The psychological burden faced by inmates in Colombia's toughest prisons is immense and often invisible to the outside world. Behind the concrete walls, barbed wire, and overcrowded cells lies a silent epidemic of mental and emotional suffering that affects nearly every prisoner, regardless of their background, crime, or sentence. The harsh realities of daily life inside these institutions can break a person's spirit long before their sentence ends. Living in constant fear and uncertainty has a devastating impact on mental health. Inmates are subjected to unpredictable violence, both from fellow prisoners and sometimes even from guards. The tension of never knowing when a fight might erupt, when a gang might target you, or when you might lose access to food or water creates a state of ongoing psychological distress. This chronic stress can lead to heightened anxiety, insomnia, panic attacks, and long-term trauma. Isolation is another major contributor to emotional deterioration. While prisons are physically crowded, emotionally, they can be the loneliest places on earth. Many inmates are cut off from their families, whether due to financial limitations that prevent visits, geographic distance, or strained relationships. Some prisoners, especially those in solitary confinement, can go weeks or months with little to no human interaction. This sensory and emotional deprivation can lead to deep depression, hallucinations, and in severe cases, self-harm or suicidal thoughts. For many inmates, particularly those incarcerated at a young age or without a strong support system, the lack of mental health services means that emotional pain festers unchecked. Prison psychologists and counselors, when they exist, are overwhelmed and understaffed. Most inmates never receive any form of psychological evaluation, let alone therapy or counseling. Those with pre-existing mental health conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or PTSD often go untreated, worsening their symptoms and sometimes making them targets for abuse or exploitation by others. The emotional weight of guilt, shame, regret, and fear can be overwhelming. Inmates may replay the events that led to their incarceration over and over in their minds. Those who were wrongfully accused or are still awaiting trial can feel especially helpless, caught in a limbo where they have no control over their fate. Even for those who want to change, the toxic environment of prison, marked by aggression, lack of empathy, and survivalist mentality, offers little space for healing or personal growth. In addition, The lack of structure and meaningful activity within the prison system contributes heavily to mental stagnation. With no daily routine outside of basic survival, inmates may fall into cycles of hopelessness and despair. Days blend into nights, weeks into months, and the passage of time becomes both a punishment and a haunting reminder of lost years. The absence of educational or vocational programs means that prisoners have few opportunities to mentally engage or imagine a better future, making rehabilitation a distant dream. Substance abuse also becomes a coping mechanism for many. With drugs circulating freely inside prison walls, some inmates turn to narcotics as a way to numb emotional pain, escape reality, or simply survive the emotional roller coaster of incarceration. This only deepens their psychological problems and increases their risk of addiction, health complications, or becoming further entangled in prison gang networks. The mental and emotional strain isn't limited to the inmates. Correctional officers and prison staff are also exposed to constant stress, danger, and emotional fatigue, often without proper training or support to deal with the psychological toll. The result is a system teetering on the edge, where no one, prisoner or staff, is truly well, and where mental health is treated as an afterthought rather than a foundational concern. Attempts at rehabilitation expanded. Despite the grim and often brutal conditions inside Colombia's toughest prisons, there are sparks of resilience and hope in the form of rehabilitation efforts. These attempts, though frequently limited in scope and poorly supported by the state, reflect the human desire for change, purpose, and redemption, even in the darkest circumstances. Inmates, NGOs, prison reform advocates, and even a few progressive-minded prison administrators have all played a role in creating opportunities for growth and transformation within the prison walls. Rehabilitation in such extreme environments is not easy. Overcrowding, violence, and a lack of resources create constant barriers. Yet, some inmates find ways to better themselves through programs that offer education, vocational training, or creative outlets. For example, a number of prisons have introduced workshops in carpentry, metalworking, tailoring, and agriculture, where inmates can learn practical skills that may help them reintegrate into society upon release. These programs not only provide technical knowledge, but also instill discipline, focus, and a sense of responsibility. Education, while not always consistent or well-funded, is another important path to rehabilitation. Inmates who never completed school often get a second chance to learn how to read, write, or earn a high school diploma. In some rare cases, universities partner with correctional institutions to offer distance learning or in-person classes, allowing prisoners to work toward degrees in fields like law, sociology, or literature. For those who participate, education becomes a powerful tool, not only for self-improvement, but for reimagining their identity beyond the label of criminal. Creative and expressive programs also play a crucial role. Art, theater, and writing workshops allow inmates to process their emotions, share their stories, and explore their humanity. Some prisoners have written poetry, painted murals, or even performed plays that reflect their experiences and struggles. These outlets offer emotional relief and help build empathy, communication skills, and community inside prison walls. In recent years, certain Colombian prisons have gained international attention for their inmate-run initiatives. For instance, there are examples of prisoners launching small businesses, bakeries, crafts, even barbershops inside the facility, where they earn a modest income, support their families, and gain experience in entrepreneurship. These programs, often supported by outside donors or NGOs, are fragile but inspiring demonstrations of what rehabilitation can look like when people are given chance. Religious and spiritual programs also offer some inmates a path toward inner peace and moral reflection. Whether through church services, Bible studies, or other spiritual groups, many find solace in faith. These communities can offer a support network, a sense of belonging, and moral guidance in a place where such things are hard to come by. Peer mentorship is another under-recognized form of rehabilitation. In some prisons, Inmates who have embraced personal reform take it upon themselves to guide others. They may lead informal support groups, help newcomers adjust, or speak out against gang violence. These individuals serve as role models within the prison community and prove that change is possible, even in the most hostile environments. However, the success of these efforts often depends on external support and personal initiative, rather than any structured, government-led rehabilitation strategy. The Colombian penal system, underfunded and overstretched, struggles to implement consistent or widespread programs. Where rehabilitation does occur, it's often because of individual efforts, the dedication of NGOs, or the perseverance of the inmates themselves. Systemic neglect expanded. At the core of the crisis within Colombia's prison system lies a deep and long-standing issue of systemic neglect, a failure of governance, planning, and accountability that has allowed prisons to deteriorate into dangerous, overcrowded, and dehumanizing institutions. This neglect is not merely about the physical decay of facilities or the lack of food and medical care. It reflects a broader societal indifference and a lack of political will to address the root causes of crime, poverty, and recidivism. For decades, Colombia's criminal justice system has operated in a reactive rather than proactive manner. Instead of investing in crime prevention, education, social services, or alternatives to incarceration, the focus has overwhelmingly been on punishment and containment. This has led to the mass incarceration of vulnerable populations, including the poor, the mentally ill, and those involved in nonviolent offenses like drug possession or petty theft. Many of these individuals end up trapped in a system that offers little hope of reform or rehabilitation. The neglect begins at the legislative level. Harsh sentencing laws, slow judicial processes, and an over-reliance on pretrial detention have contributed to a prison population that far exceeds the capacity of existing facilities. Thousands of individuals remain behind bars for months or even years without ever being convicted, simply because the courts are too backlogged to process their cases. This not only violates their basic rights, but also places a massive and unnecessary burden on the prison system. Infrastructure is another major area where neglect is visible. Many of Colombia's prisons were built decades ago and are now falling apart. Cells are crumbling, plumbing systems are broken, ventilation is poor or non-existent, and sanitation is below any acceptable standard. Maintenance is sporadic at best, and upgrades or renovations are rare, if they happen at all. The lack of investment in infrastructure directly contributes to the spread of disease, the breakdown of order, and the overall deterioration of inmates' physical and mental health. Corruption further compounds the issue. Underpaid and overworked, some prison staff resort to bribery or involvement in illicit trade to survive. Contraband flows freely within many facilities, and gangs are often able to bribe their way to power, creating informal economies and enforcing their own rules. Oversight bodies, when they exist, are weak or poorly resourced, allowing abuses to go unchecked and making meaningful reform extremely difficult. Neglect also manifests in how the prison population is perceived by the public and treated by the media. Inmates are often dehumanized and portrayed solely as threats to society rather than individuals, many of whom are victims of poverty, systemic inequality, or state violence. This narrative reinforces public apathy and political inaction. Politicians, fearing backlash, are reluctant to advocate for prison reform, knowing it could be seen as soft on crime. As a result, the prison system remains low on the list of national priorities. Moreover, systemic neglect does not end at the prison gates. Upon release, former inmates face massive obstacles to reintegration. With little to no support from the state, they are often left to fend for themselves in communities that stigmatize them, with few employment opportunities and limited access to housing or education. This increases the likelihood of reoffending, creating a cycle of incarceration that further strains the already failing system. Systemic neglect is not just a symptom of broken institutions, it is a cause of them. It reflects a broader social failure to address inequality, to see the humanity in every person, and to believe in the possibility of second chances. Until these deeper issues are acknowledged and addressed, prisons in Colombia will continue to reflect the fractures of the society that built them. Daily life and survival strategies expanded. Daily life inside Colombia's toughest prisons is not merely about serving time. It is a relentless struggle for survival. In an environment marked by overcrowding, violence, and systemic neglect, every action an inmate takes is influenced by the need to stay safe, maintain some sense of dignity, and, if possible, find a purpose amidst the chaos. Survival isn't just physical. It's mental, emotional, and even spiritual. Inmates must navigate a complex and often brutal social structure just to make it from one day to the next. The first challenge inmates face is adapting to a new world with its own unwritten rules. Upon arrival, new prisoners must quickly learn the hierarchy, understand who holds power, and align themselves accordingly. In many cases, aligning with a gang becomes a matter of protection. Refusing to join can lead to isolation or becoming a target for extortion and violence. Even basic tasks, finding a safe place to sleep, accessing food, or using the bathroom, can require negotiation, barter, or submission to those in control. The black market becomes a central part of survival. With the prison system unable to provide adequate food, hygiene supplies, or medicine, inmates must rely on external support or engage in trading systems within the prison. Cigarettes, snacks, clean water, or even toilet paper become currency. Those without money or family support often suffer the most, forced to beg, steal, or submit to exploitative relationships in exchange for necessities. Some inmates take on jobs inside the prison, like cleaning, cooking, or running errands for gang leaders, just to earn small favors or better treatment. Sanitation is another daily struggle. With limited access to running water and proper toilet facilities, maintaining basic hygiene becomes a challenge. Inmates may go days without bathing, wash their clothes in dirty water, and sleep in vermin-infested cells. Disease spreads quickly in these conditions, so those with knowledge of basic health practices or access to soap and clean water are at a significant advantage. Mental resilience plays a crucial role in survival. Inmates develop routines to cope with monotony, fear, and emotional strain. Some take to exercise, using makeshift weights or engaging in bodyweight workouts to keep themselves physically strong and mentally focused. Others write, read, or form study groups if materials are available. Faith and spirituality also serve as coping mechanisms, offering comfort and a sense of structure in an otherwise chaotic world. Prison chapels, if present, become important sanctuaries for reflection, hope, and community. Social dynamics are constantly in flux, and trust is rare. Many inmates form alliances or small groups to watch each other's backs. These informal families offer protection, emotional support, and a degree of social belonging. However, alliances can shift rapidly due to power struggles, betrayals, or external pressures from gangs or corrupt guards. As a result, prisoners must remain hyper-aware of their surroundings at all times, learning to read body language, decipher coded threats, and avoid unnecessary confrontations. Communication with the outside world is another vital aspect of daily survival. Letters, phone calls, and occasional visits are lifelines that remind inmates they are still part of something bigger. Maintaining family connections can provide emotional strength and even practical support, as relatives often send food, money, or hygiene products when allowed. However, for those without outside support, isolation becomes a severe emotional burden that can lead to depression or mental breakdowns. In such harsh conditions, resilience becomes a form of rebellion. Every small act of self-care, every moment of peace found in prayer or a shared conversation, is a way of asserting humanity in a place designed to strip it away. Prisoners who manage to survive day to day are not just enduring time. They are resisting a system that often seems built to forget them. In the shadows of Colombia's toughest prisons, beyond the headlines and statistics, are human beings, flawed, forgotten, but not beyond redemption. Their lives, shaped by violence, neglect, and hardship, are not just cautionary tales, but urgent calls for reflection and reform. The daily battles they face are not simply the consequences of their crimes, but the results of a broken system that punishes without healing, confines without correcting, and survives without serving justice. If we are to believe in the value of human life, in the power of second chances, and in the dignity that should be afforded to every individual, then we must look deeper into these prisons, not with judgment, but with resolve. Because how a nation treats its prisoners is a reflection of how it values justice, compassion, and humanity. And until we address the rot at the heart of these institutions, we are all complicit in the silence that allows suffering to persist behind bars.